David, this is Evolutionary Psychology, the podcast. Who are you?
I'm David Pinsof.
And I am Dave Pietraszewski. And what do we do in this podcast?
Well, we are actual evolutionary psychologists, and we talk to actual evolutionary psychologists who do actual evolutionary psychology.
That sounds actually pretty fun.
Yeah, it is.
Enjoy.
Hey, Dave,
David, good to see you.
we have with us a veteran evolutionary psychologist, Debra Lieberman, who is the editor of the premier journal in the evolutionary social sciences, Evolution and Human Behavior, working on the textbook for evolutionary psychology. She is a fascinating scholar with incredibly interesting ideas. We get into all sorts of topics. We get into disgust, disease, pathogens, COVID-19, how the pandemic changed our perspectives on human nature. Uh, it's
I like how we address earlier in an episode, you were wondering what is disgust doing in morality. And I
mhm.
feel like Deb just really
Yes.
hits that nail on the head.
Yeah. This one was a really fun conversation. I think I think you'll love it.
Enjoy. So
Cool.
I think I successfully found the recording button. So today we have Deb Lieberman, Dr. Deb Lieberman, University of Miami, graduate of the Center for Evolutionary Psychology. Deb, you and I think, overlapped for a year at the CP.
My sense of time is awful. And
Okay.
so I just know you were there. How long? I don't
Yeah,
know.
I don't know either, but I feel like you were a bridge to many people who I did not overlap with. And I think between the two of us, I think we captured a lot of people, and we're going to have other people on. But it's good to see you. We've already been talking before we even started about a bunch of cool stuff you're working on, and new projects. Um, but one question we wanted to, and we sort of start with often is. Um, some people have origin stories in science. Almost everybody in evolutionary psychology, evolutionary behavioral sciences has an origin story.
Yeah, me
Um,
personally, I got bit by a radioactive evolutionary psychologist,
yes.
and that was my origin story.
Named.
And you're now working on the screenplay for that with
Yes.
somebody else in LA to
Hmm.
yeah
Yep. Exactly.
to sell the rights to that. But
Hmm.
Deb, I don't. I know I have a couple stories in my head about you getting like physically to Santa Barbara that are crazy stories, but I don't know if I know your
I'm not telling that
I don't know if
story.
I know your origin story. Um,
um, the origin story.
yeah.
I have, how far back do you want to go?
We both, everybody, yeah, David and I literally started from our childhoods.
Okay, because
So
I was going to start with my bat mitzvah.
great. Go
Awesome. Mazel tov. Let's do it.
lay it on us. Yes.
No, I've always been interested in the materialistic explanations for things. So I'm only kind of joking, but in Hebrew school, I would ask. I was told if you said like the 12 names of God that you would like combust or something.
Mm.
So every week I'd ask for another one. So ever the empiricist. So but I was very interested in the physical stuff. I it was really undergrad that started everything. So I was off to med school, interested in being a neurosurgeon. And then I took a course by David Sloan Wilson entitled Evolution in Human Behavior. It was a senior graduate, cross-listed course at Binghamton. And it sounded so interesting. It was in the biology department talking about humans. And I was like, this is exactly what I'm interested in. And I sat in that class. I learned a lot. I said very little because I was so intimidated. But I learned about game theory. We read The Adaptive Mind and Homicide. And so it was a through the looking glass kind of moment that you won't, you're lucky if you get once. I've had a few being at the CEP, but from that class, what's funny is when I first learned about evolutionary psychology, I thought all the interesting questions had been answered. Like, I'm going to go to grad school, but why? Like, they seem to have nailed it. And so it ends up that Human Behavior and Evolution Society meeting was planned to be at Binghamton that summer. So kind of the stars aligned, and I helped out with that. I got to meet a lot of people. I saw, where'd he go?
David left. That's okay. We'll
Did I offend him?
It was something you said. Well, occasionally, who knows? David maybe had to get some groceries or coffee or something. He'll come back.
Would you like me to continue though? He's going to miss part of the story, and so, but I'll continue. We'll fill him in later.
Yeah,
or do you want me to?
Oh, okay. He's right back. Yeah, we can.
Hey.
Hey, sorry, I don't know what happened there.
That's okay.
My internet just randomly cut out.
You might be a superhero, and you went and did something at lightning.
Neptune, you're back from Neptune. Welcome back.
Ah, yes, good to be back.
You're not even winded, so.
So I will make a long story very short. But basically, David Sloan Wilson I said I want to go to grad school. Actually, there is a little bit more. I wanted to go to grad school. And at the time, where do you go? And so obviously I had the book in my hand, and I was like, John and Nita, I was like, clearly these are the two people I want to work with. I had homicide in my hand. I'm like, Canada? Like, I don't know if I'm allowed to leave the country. So I put that down. And then we had read a little bit about, in the Adapted Mind, there was some stuff by Kenrick. And my sister was at ASU. So I was like, hey, ASU, sure, why not? I applied to ASU and accidentally must have checked off the wrong box. I got a free ride in the biochemistry program, because I was a biochemistry major, not a psychology. But when they said major, I was like, biochemistry. So apparently that was what they thought I was going for. And then I applied to New Mexico to work with Thornhill. He took a different student. You know what I'm blanking? Paul Andrews. He took.
I applied to New Mexico. I still haven't heard back from them.
Well, actually, I applied to the University of Michigan to work with David Buss. I still haven't gotten accepted or rejected from them. So
we'll have to check in with these folks. Yeah.
But I got accepted to Santa Barbara, and it was the happiest day of my life. It was, well, one of them, and so it was just an incredible opportunity. And so it's crazy, the path. But yeah, so that's my origin story.
Yeah. What do you think when you were in medical school and what you were reading about homicide and the adapted mind, do you have an articulation, or have you thought about like what it is that you were wanting to find that you found in that stuff?
In terms of the shift from medical school to grad school?
Or just there's something about, I mean, for both David and I and almost everyone we talk to, there's something about this that appeals to us. And some of it may not even be we're not aware of. Like, do you have an idea of what that is for you?
Yes,
like
I do actually. Yeah. So there were two things. So from David Sloan Wilson's office, I hung out in the biology department. So I would go over to the biology professors next door. One was studying spiders, but I would go talk to him and he'd be like, why are you talking to me about humans? And then I go talk to another biologist, like, why are you talking to me about humans? And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm confused. And then I went to the anthropology department and they're like, why are you talking to me about biology? I was like, oh, so you know what kind of anthropology department or whatever office I landed in. And then I was like, well, maybe I should like take a psych course. And I remember signing up for biological psychology. That seemed to be that would be the crossover. Right. And I think I lasted all of like half a lecture. I was like, this is boring. And so, so I quickly learned that it was very controversial. And so, me, I'm like, hey, there's a controversy. There's a lot of people on that side. There seems to be a real few people on this side, and they're really, really smart. And I'm kind of agreeing with them. And I'm not going to so chances are I'm going to like what's happening over here. So I was like, put me in coach, so I saw a controversy and I just kind of ran straight into that. But the other thing I asked myself was, I remember sitting with all the textbooks on my bed, like MCAT GRE time. Yeah. And it was at that moment I asked myself, in 10 years, I'm going to pretend like that I am a neurosurgeon. I am rich. I've got my ski house. I've got my Porsche Targa. I've got everything I want. Would I look back and regret not having, tried to become a professor and effective researcher and teacher like David Sloan Wilson? And I said, yeah, I think I would. And I said, okay, now imagine 10 years, you're a full professor, you're driving your Prius. Sorry. Like, just kind of like making do and, doing your thing. Do you think you'd look back and regret not having, a large bank account and the ability to kind of do all these things? And I was like, nope. So vow of, poverty was taken, I guess, right there.
Yeah.
Those were two big things. The idea that it was controversial and I didn't know whether I could do it. Like becoming a writer and a researcher, that was the hard part. Becoming a mechanic and sawing open a brain and fixing things and, like that's easy. That's just, you need a manual and can memorize stuff. But how do you actually push science forward? That was challenging.
Yeah, it's one of the things I think that's like a theme of psych is it's like courageous because like we're doing things that are uncertain, like especially when you're exploring new areas, and it really takes a lot of courage. Like we've both, David and I, talked about, and I'll speak for myself, like one of the things that appealed to me about John and Lita was it was not just controversial, but it was courageous about what was true, regardless of what other people thought about it, or maybe didn't even understand it or was off their radar. And that was really exciting. And like, I don't know, like being at the CP during that time, it was very special because it really felt like we were sort of on the frontier of science. Did you feel that?
I mean, yeah, I felt like it was us against the world. And I think there are times that we could have probably been advised a little bit better to not be so combative.
Right.
I think they'd argue they didn't advise us to be combative, but yet I feel like the culture I grew up in was like, on guard, get ready. And so I feel like martial arts should have been part of our training as well. But I would say, but here's what I found exciting. And at the time, it took a while to learn, which is what are the issues? What are the debates? And then what are some really good arguments to address it? And what are people likely to say? And what are some good responses? And it's only been recently that I can do all of this calmly without like my hair going, lighting on fire. But it's because at first it's like, you're coming at me and, don't take a shot at my science. And this is so important and you don't know anything and move over. But it was good to have it felt good to have a team. It was more like a family.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one of the things, I don't know, David, I'm sorry. Well, one of the things I remember, Deb, I think the first time I met you, and we can cut this out if you want. It's not, I mean, was we were at Lita's. Yeah, I'll let you'll hear it. I was like, you were already at the CP and I was an early grad student and I was very nervous. And we, as you know, Deb and David, I think you know this too, is like what a lot of John and Lita's students would do is go to their house to like work, right? Because they were writing always in their house. And I just opened a can of worms for Deb. And then, so I'm very nervous and I go and Deb is there and Lita's there. But when I get to the house, neither Deb nor Lita are there. John lets me in. And then Deb is coming down the stairs with Lita's daughter. And Lita's daughter at the time is pretty young, and they're both doing quote unquote reconnaissance with Lita. So immediately I'm sort of like Deb is playing with Nike, and it's wonderful because it's like a family, right? Like it's like you're visiting somebody's house, and like there's like alloparenting happening, and then Lita starts talking to me about science once she comes down, and there's this game Barrel Full of Monkeys, and she's dumping that over Lita's head as Lita's talking to me, and like with parenting brain, she's like just ignoring it as they're doing that, and that always stuck with me, Deb, like you doing reconnaissance with Nike. But what I love about that is like it really felt like a family, and it was just this like we're comfortable in our science, and part of our science is people being organisms and like parenting and that kind of thing. That's sort of like baked into. Of course, that's just part of us, and then we're also doing like really cool science. And I wasn't nervous after that, but Deb, that was like you helped me like be like that. That was like a real moment for me of like, oh yeah, no, these are like good people really doing science to the point where they're like playing with their kids while we're doing science.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. And for the record, Nike's still someone I'd enjoy doing reconnaissance with.
Yes,
She's
exactly.
sharp.
No, totally. Yes, yes.
Oh, well, this is making me think that the evolutionary psychology story isn't in the Marvel universe, but it's a kind of sitcom, where everyone's hanging out in Lita and John's house, and the kid has her cute one-liners. Maybe it's a kind of like Full House vibe.
Um, I guess it isn't like Marvel, so I would agree with that. But I'm not sure that I'm happy with the Full House. Now that you said that, I'm gonna have to think about something a little bit different. But it's like Brady Bunch. It was unique and it was special, and I enjoy it. And even though my first job was to Hawaii, people were like, "Oh my God, you must have loved it." I actually got a bit depressed because just leaving the mothership, I was like, "Oh my God, like this is awful." And being there at the same time, I was definitely ready to go and to branch out, leave the nest. But it was sad because what you didn't know was how little support you have out there, and how intellectually lonely it could be. So, but it's funny how technology and even things like this have made life far more enjoyable.
Yeah, yeah.
So, as a leader in the field who sort of began, in the literal home of Leda Cosmides and John Tooby, how do you think the field has changed, the public's impression of it has changed? You mentioned there was a spirit of combativeness, us against the world. Do you think the temperature is still that high, or has it come down a bit? How has the vibe changed regarding evolutionary psychology since you began?
I would say the temperature has come down quite a bit, and I'm really happy about that. So what was it? Was it Gould who talked about the three stages of science, and kind of like it's garbage, and then it's not important, and yeah, we knew it all along.
Mhm.
I think we're still in we're 2.25. Like I don't think it's not quite halfway to we've known it all along, but
Mhm.
it's just kind of like, yeah, it just doesn't really matter. But I think that people see that it doesn't matter because they don't know how to do it. They don't know the science of it.
Right.
And so it's like, I don't have I'm smart enough to know that it matters, but I don't know how to actually apply it to my particular field or science. And so it actually is a skill. It's a skill set and a set of tools, and there's ways of doing it wrong.
Mhm.
And that's also now, I think the field is quite healthy in its teenage years. But I think that I would love to see better training across the board. I don't necessarily know how that happens. So part of it is I'm writing this textbook as one effort to kind of provide at least another reference for it that hits on a lot of the cognitive science that I think is missing from the field. I think the field is doing great. I am excited about the different areas it's going in. I think
Mhm.
that there's a lot more room to grow. So, I mean, development should be an area. I mean, it's come a long way, but I think that the idea that there's so few places you could go to study evolutionary psychology with a developmental psychologist other than UCSB, Yale, a couple of other places, right? So it's very limited. But then you talk about political science, the clinical side of things, which is super important. Um,
Mhm.
I think that a lot of the social sciences, that there's a lot of room to grow, I guess. And so, but I think it's hopeful. I think more and more people, when they hear evolutionary psychology, the disgust face, it's only slight. It's not like, it's not like like they have to walk away from you anymore. It's not like I
Mm.
can't be seen with you. Now
Right.
it's I don't know. So, and I'll take that any day. So I'm actually quite hopeful. Plus, the emotions and all the great work that's being done on the emotions, it's such an easy way to start to introduce the field that people are like, oh, well, that makes really great sense. And so I think that's a great vehicle to start to begin conversations and introduce the many areas, And so in any case, my general take is that the field it's come far. I think that there's scattershot, always, but by and large, I think we're doing quite well. I get concerned about the future in terms of number of people training the number of people. And so my university, they haven't replaced key evolutionary people who, and at every turn they refuse to even, engage. And so that it's hard to have a lab of, a person, just one person taking on graduate students. So maybe we can come up with ways of working together across multiple kind of solo sites to help kind of put together graduate programs and collect graduate students to train.
Yeah, there's a bit of a decline in the reproductive success of the field in terms of training professors to occupy key positions around the world who have this perspective and can in turn train new scholars in it and leave more descendants intellectually.
Deb, one thing I'm hearing you say too is that, and I think David and I have talked about this with past people on, is that the early first generation, like the Martin and Margot in Homicide or John and Lita, it was sort of they had to fight for, it was existential, like proof of concept. But now sort of currently it's, well, how do you actually do it? So if you're already past the point of acceptance or at least curiosity and you're not immediately running away, how do you do it well? Do things like task analysis or the cognitive part? It sounds like that's something you're sort of focusing on with your textbook.
Yes, I don't think that any of the current textbooks have done a good job introducing the evolutionary cognitive science. So how do you do it? Like what is it? What are the questions we ask in terms of the algorithms, the information processing structure? Like really in the weeds, I know, but to me, it's like you got to go there in order to zoom back out and have a better handle on macro behaviors and patterns.
Yeah. When I teach Ev Psych, actually, this after I talk about Lita's Wason task, I actually talk about your kin detection and disgust and incest avoidance work. And I think, I mean, if you'd like, we can always talk a little bit about that because the people who are listening, there's presumably a large range of people who know us, and then people who don't know anything about us or this. And I think it's really cool work. For me, what I like about it is very much at that software level, right? Where it's sort of, you're taking modern people who, for them, sort of incest is something that's like they read about in Greek mythology, or it's sort of this thing, that you just hear about fictively. It doesn't feel like a day-to-day concern, right? But yet you have like,
thankfully,
no, exactly. But it's a really good example of, and even kinship. I think sometimes when people hear kinship, especially for like high SES academics, it feels like very, oh, that's like what people growing up in places where they're still around their family, like kin. It just sounds like kind of yokely, right? It's sort of like, and I've detected that, like it doesn't feel. It doesn't feel sort of like high status or high class to talk about kinship or incest, right? Like it's just sort of this. But what I love about this work is your work is that it's not something people would intuitively think would be part of their day-to-day thinking, but it's so powerful, and you're getting like this beautiful results. And so, like I actually think oftentimes, as much as Lita's Wason selection task work, which we actually haven't talked about yet, and we can talk about another time, but I actually think your work will sort of always be really important in that initial work. I mean, and obviously a lot of your work since then, but I think it's one of the things that gets people thinking the right way at the software level.
I think so. I mean, I just asking the question of, how do you know who your close relatives are? So you're right. There are a lot of people who might be listening who haven't heard about this research. But so I offer the question, like, how do you know who your genetic relatives are? Like, how did you come to figure it out? And you ask a class of students this, and they're like, oh, you're told. And I was like, yeah, but other animals figure it out and they don't have language,
Mm.
and they're like, okay. And so, you smell them. Well, that's not exactly how humans seem to sniff out relatives. And so that then they're kind of, some of them get stumped to like, oh, you know them from early on and this and that. So we start to kind of very quickly narrow in on the possibilities, but you can see that it's just something they haven't really thought about. So, but the idea that the two cues that we've at least found that influence and affect how you, whether you categorize someone as a sibling, is whether you saw the woman who breastfed you caring for and, giving birth to and breastfeeding another young infant, that infant has a very good probability of being your sibling. But then but that's only good for younger siblings. How do you know of the array of kids out there who's possibly an older sibling? And that also tracks parental investment, but it's over the long haul. So who else are my parents investing in throughout the period of childhood dependency? And so also known as co-residence duration. And so those two cues really predict how your estimate of relatedness, and not only how gross you find them as a sexual partner in general, but also how nice you are in general. And I'd say in general for a variety of reasons. So I think that these systems aren't foolproof. And I think that there are factors that can push them around, and situations that would cause some people to find a close genetic relative potentially more attractive under certain circumstances than other circumstances. But by and large, cultural universal is this inbreeding avoidance system that allows us to detect kin. And that what I like about the incest avoidance stuff is not only does it really get into, like, you can map it out in terms of inputs, how things get integrated, because a lot of stuff has to get integrated, but you got to figure out what and then go and test it. And then the emotion of disgust to regulate the aversion. But then it also allows you to figure out how does this kind of get displayed in the array of cultural variations in terms of the taboo. So from this one psychological system, you then get a cultural set of norms that can vary. And what I like about this particular example is you can take it through each of its different kinds of questions. So what are the selection pressures? Like, why does it exist? How does it work in terms of the programming? How does it develop? How does it break down? What are the neural kind of, the neural regions, or where is it actually seated in the brain? How does it get displayed and reflected in culture, and so forth? And so you can actually take it through all of the different levels of analysis and answer questions at each level. I think that each question is pretty much one academic's life's work, but at the same time, it's just, I think we could do this with everything. That's the idea of being able to map the human mind and culture. So
I'm interested in that last part of the causal model, the culture part, because simply doing the task analysis of how do I figure out who my genetic relatives are, how do I be nice to my relatives and avoid having sex with them, that all makes sense from an evolutionary perspective. You want to help people who probabilistically share the genes for helping kin. You want to avoid reproducing with genetic relatives to avoid, the costs of inbreeding. But the moral part of the equation isn't, to me, as obvious. And I still think that's kind of a live area of research and a mysterious aspect of this psychology, which is it's not merely that I'm grossed out by having sex with genetic relatives. I'm also inclined to judge it as morally wrong. And cultures around the world have judged it as morally wrong and have had various taboos and rules against it. And so what I'm curious about, and you don't need to have the final answer to this question. I still think it's an interesting area of research, and lots of questions remain here. But what drives me to the point of I'm grossed out by having sex with my relatives. I won't do it myself, to this is unethical. This is morally wrong. I'm going to punish, condemn, or shun other people who do it. How do you explain the bridge between those 2 points?
Well, I think it's a great question, and I do have an answer. Whether it's the
Hmm.
answer is a whole different story. So I'll leave
Hmm.
that to you. Um, so we have a natural inbreeding aversion, and so our value of close relatives registers as an intense disgust.
Hmm.
And I think that disgust is an interesting emotion because it becomes now available to a psychology that's looking for behaviors that others are doing that are of low value.
Mm.
Why? Because we are evil humans and we form coalitions and we are interested in protecting scarce resources. So we form coalitions, determine which groups have the lowest leverage and go after them to prevent them from taking and acquiring and defending those resources. And who do we want to do that to? Well, we don't want to do it to people we cooperate with and people we find valuable and so forth.
Hmm.
We do that to the people we find and do things of low value. And
Yeah.
so disgust just happens to be one of those emotions that signals. It's like a really, really, really loud bell to the coalitional system to say, we've got a winner here.
Mm.
We've got something that's registered as extremely low social value. Is this a potential coordination point for how to get, to rally the troops in order to go after people who do this, who think that, in order to marginalize them and exploit them and kill them and whatever. I mean, like I think it's a very
Hmm.
dark side of human nature, but so it's funny that it's all labeled as morality. But I just
Yeah.
that's a whole other fun. See, I like controversy, so
Yeah.
this is like
I mean,
naturally where
you're
I'm at
preaching to the
home
choir.
here.
Yeah, I have a blog
Yeah.
post called
You-
"Morality is Not Nice," where I write about the dark sides of morality, and I think it is, if you just look at the anthropological record, the historical record, and even just recent psychology studies, like it is becoming increasingly clear that morality is a very dark force in humanity.
I
Um,
get, yeah, words like this is good, this is bad, like make me very nervous. It's like, who are
yeah.
you trying to coordinate? Like, what's going on? Like, hold on. But, but, but by and large, I mean, so I mean, I'd like to leave aside the question as to whether there are like certain ethical laws and moral law. Like, I'd like to put that aside for a second and just focus
mhm.
on how it is disgust ends up informing and coloring our sense of morality. Like I think there are other aspects of morality that are worth talking about, but in terms of how disgust colors it, my sense is that it does no good. And there are folks who think that, listen, disgust is a moral compass. So Leon Cass, disgust is a moral compass, and we need to use it in order to guide, our moral decision making. But Martha Nussbaum basically said, no, that's the wrong thing. And Carlton Patrick and I, we both also have said, disgust is not the answer to our norms and legal systems. At least that's my opinion. What should be is a whole other fun story, but disgust, I would argue, should not be there. But in any case, so how does it get in there? Low social value, which makes it just available to systems sifting for groups to go after, to marginalize and to outcompete for resources. It's an get them before they get us mentality, and disgust is used in that effort.
Hmm.
So the
I,
idea, oh, sorry, David, go ahead.
I'm wondering if an additional aspect of it is the contamination logic of disgust. So if you're trying to avoid things that are contaminated or that have pathogens on them, you not only want to avoid the thing itself, you want to avoid anything that has come into contact with that thing. Even a tiny droplet of fecal matter could ruin an entire meal. So it's not really the quantity of the contamination, it's the contamination itself. And if I'm sick, you not only want to avoid contact with me, you want to avoid contact with other people who've been in contact with me. So if I elicit disgust, I'm going to have a hard time mobilizing allies to my side, because people will not only not want to associate with me, they're going to not want to associate with other people who are associated with me. And so because disgust elicits this contamination psychology, it makes it particularly useful for rallying coalitions, because if I can elicit disgust about you as a target, I'm not only motivating avoidance of you, but I'm depriving you of the ability to mobilize allies in response. Whereas with other emotions, if you elicit anger, maybe your allies will come to your side and try to justify your transgressions. But if you elicit disgust, that's really cutting off all of your means of social support in a way that's really useful for me if I'm trying to rally a winning coalition against you. Do you buy that logic?
I do. I think there's something to that. I mean, I think the psychology, if you're sick, it's a very different psychology of me dealing with you, right? It's not a coalitional, it's not the moral social value side of things. I mean, it is the social value, but it's more of directly transmission of, pathogens that I'm concerned about. But when it starts to get used at the coalitional group level, team level, I think that disgust is sticky and it's dangerous. Like that anger. Listen, the thing with anger is, if I'm angry with you because I'm trying to change your way and how you value me. And that's the whole function of it, right? So improve the way you value me now. But with disgust, it's you can do whatever you want. It's like, say whatever you want. There's no amount of social value I don't know that that's the case, but it would be very interesting to find out how much social value you need to bring to the table to erase disgust. Like what actually bleaches out disgust, how much goodness and value.
It's kind of hard to get out the stain of disgust. Like with anger, it's very easy to, alleviate someone's anger, just apologize. Just apologize, make amends, help them out, whatever you need to do to make sure that they know that you're not going to behave that way in the future. But with disgust, there's really not much you can do to, you just kind of have to hope that people forget about it,
Take a shower.
Yeah, take a shower, but like even that, I don't know. It's it's hard to wash off,
No, of course. Yeah. It's a physical science thing. In Dennis
time.
Terms, yeah.
I find what's very interesting is if you go back in just like even in Hollywood, we're all like some interesting stories. Although I have, and now that I just brought that up, I just remembered something. So, but a lot of the stories that we talk about over time, like people like run into problems, like Rob Lowe. He had some problems, like he had some problems back in the day. But he's great now. Like he's like loved now. And it's like that amount of time took the stink off. Right. So some things are manageable over time. There's one that's not. So have you heard about his name is Armie Hammer, the guy who it's a great movie, Man from U.N.C.L.E. But then I heard that he likes to eat people. Like didn't you hear about this?
No.
I think one of you should look it up right now. But basically,
interesting. Okay.
But if you, why am I forgetting the name for this? What's it called?
Cannibalism.
Thank you. So yeah, he said something favorable about cannibalism or something.
Oh wow! So so he said something. He doesn't actually eat people, but he said something favorable about it, or he actually does eat people.
You know what? I do not know the answer to that.
That itself is an interesting psychological phenomenon, that the distinction between, verbally approving of something and actually engaging in something is so often easily conflated.
Well, all I have to say is that he got caught in the crosshairs of exactly, I'm just looking it up, of this highly disgusting kind of behavior.
Okay.
And when I heard about it, I mean, I guess because I'm me, I laughed because I was just like
it's odd.
Of course there's a human out there that does this, right? Yes. But the idea is I also laughed because I was like, there's no coming back from that. There are some things that you could do that cross the moral boundaries. Yeah, there's certain things you do that just can't. No amount of cleansing time or showers.
Yeah. Okay, that's super interesting. I mean, it makes this point that disgust is really a powerful social weapon. That because there are so many ways to alleviate people's anger via apologies, making amends, concessions, whatever, but there's basically no way to alleviate disgust once it's been activated, or it's really hard to do. It's a much more potent and powerful social weapon to wield against your enemies. So I just find that really, really interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway, you were going to say something, Dave?
Oh, I don't know, Deb, what were you going to say?
Well, so one of the things that that Carlton and I tried to map out was the ways that disgust is used
Hmm.
uh, by by moral psychology, and we came up with three different ways it seems to be used. So first, it is a kind of internal register of what I find disgusting, and therefore what norms wouldn't be costly for me to back. Right. So
Hmm.
if I didn't like stewed tomatoes, if I didn't like foie gras, right? Because California went after foie gras, right? So if I didn't like foie gras and those rules, I would have been like, I back it 100%. Doesn't affect me. I'm on board, right? And so it tells you kind of the kinds of things that are less costly to back. So that's one thing. Disgust also, you can take other people's temperature, right? In terms of you hear disgust, and you now know what kind of moral campaigns they're likely to initiate and back and so forth. But third, and perhaps most important, given now this new landscape of coalitions that can form, disgust can be used and strategically in order to say, I'm with you, not against you, right? So,
Mm.
I can use the language of disgust to show my allegiance to the current
Mm.
group and so forth. And so,
Disgust at
there were a
the
lot of,
enemy. Disgust at the enemy
well,
group, you mean?
that's right. I mean, look,
Yes.
listen, when I was coming up through high school and college, there were a lot of senators who were not heterosexual, but were railing against, gay unions. And then you discover, oh my God, they're gay. And so it's just, but they would come out like with such disgust language. And it's
Hmm.
like, but why? And it's almost like, don't look over here, look over there. And so
Yeah.
just classic, um, that classic strategy. But in any case, so I find disgust is very useful in order to kind of show allegiance to one's
Mm. I mean,
tribe.
bringing it back, I mean, do you think the reason why it is such a good way to signal one's allegiances is number one, when you're disgusted toward someone, you're also disgusted toward anything associated with that someone. And so if you're trying to signal your allegiances, it's good to signal that they're my enemy and anyone who is allied with them is my enemy. And the other reason why it's a particularly good signal of allegiance is that is precisely the reason we just talked about, which is that it's very hard to alleviate other people's disgust once it's been activated. Or if I say I'm angry with Deb, there are things you can do to win me over and apologize. But if I say I'm disgusted with Deb, there's very little that Deb can do to change that. And so that's a much more
Yeah,
effective way of signaling my enmity toward Deb if I say I'm disgusted with her than if I say I'm mad at her. Do you buy that?
I agree. It's interesting. I do buy that. I
Yeah.
think that it's also who's motivated to use disgust language. Like if you are someone in the social hierarchy who's got very low leverage and you're not trying to convince anyone, like you're not, who are you going to convince?
Hmm.
That you're less likely to use the moral language. But if you feel that there's something to be gained for you, or there's an interest in you and being, you're going to start spouting stuff and getting to kind of, I always think about Othello, like turning all the chips next to you, the same color. And so I guess that I find it, what I find would find interesting in this area would be studies on who's motivated to use discussed language, and does that
Mm.
correlate with, for instance, some of Aaron Sell's, like indices of leverage, social leverage and power. So that would be interesting to kind of, or who's in the hub of a social network. Um,
Hmm.
so
And as an
anyway,
individual difference too, like I mean, I remember when I moved to Berlin, I sort of did a deep dive into like Third Reich history because I was like, this is a weird, crazy history.
interesting. Yeah.
And like by all accounts, like Hitler was, I mean, just a lot of attributes can be applied to him, obviously, but he was just oozing with like moral condemnation, even when he was just a lonely person, with no social support. So you can just imagine just an individual difference too, of just there are some people who are just carving up the world with moralization and
Cool.
disgust. Many of them never succeed from a coalitional perspective. I'm not saying he succeeded. I mean, but obviously from like
kind of
coordinating
succeeded.
people, he
Yeah.
was quite successful, unfortunately,
Yes.
for a while. But yeah, you can see that it's almost like, there's just part of that expression of moralization. It's just that individual, that phenotype, then interacting with cultural dynamics or social dynamics, being in the right place at the right time, is just like, oh no, yeah, it's just a fountain of what's the
Yes.
moral outrage, what's the
Mm.
disgust narrative, and the right one at the right place. It just sort of fits. And yeah.
No, it does. I think there's a lot of stuff. I mean, I've been reading a lot of Churchill recently, and
Mm.
so I've been enjoying that history as well. And I will say, like, short, unattractive, and not very formidably looking, dark triad, narcissist, psychopath. Like,
The
good luck,
Napoleon, yeah,
world.
Yeah.
the so-called Napoleon complex. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Hmm.
so it's just, I find it very interesting, because it's not just all the factors of that. Like, you have to actually, I think, get into like who this person is and their psychology, and if it's off, like, is it on the tail ends of any one of these
Right.
continuums that are
Right.
important to assess. And I think that that's certainly important when looking at personalities and leaders.
Right.
Yeah, I really like that idea, Dave. I would be very curious to look empirically if this individual difference dimension of, proneness toward moralizing, if that correlates with, leadership ambitions or political ambitions, because I would imagine that people who are really prone to carving up the world into good and evil are especially likely to seek positions of leadership and political power, because one of the functions of leadership itself is to solve coordination problems. And one of the coordination problems that we're constantly trying to solve as coalitional primates is, who are we going to gang up on? Who are we going to exploit, exclude from resources, and dominate? And that is an extremely challenging coordination problem, because the combinatorial possibilities are enormous. If you just look in, I'm working on a game theory paper on alliances, and if you just look in like a group of five, and the number of possible alliances that could be formed
Yeah.
in a group of five is like 625. It's
Yeah.
it's so the combinatorial possibilities of what alliances we can form and whom we can gang up on are enormous. And so what groups are constantly trying to look for is a way to collapse the space of all possible alliances down to a manageable number. And what I think one of the big functions of leadership is to help groups do that, is to collapse that space down to a manageable number. And the way to do that, the most powerful way to do that, is with morality and with disgust. And so I think it's no coincidence that people with leadership ambitions are prone to carving the world into good and evil, because that is precisely the service that coalitions need to be provided.
Yeah, like what Deb said, it's sort of like people are coordinating evaluations, right? Like that's
Hmm.
sort of what that phenotype is doing, or what that design is doing.
Hmm.
Yeah, no, I love this topic. I mean, I know it's definitely the third rail, but
Hmm.
it's certainly one that I think is it's important to know about the dark side of who we are.
I mean, the third railness itself is part of the psychology, right?
Yeah,
If you study this topic and you violate certain norms about discussing it, you yourself elicit disgust and taboo and coalitions forming against you, which is a kind of interesting irony about this topic.
Yeah, and one of our themes for this podcast has turned into like humility, right? About that, the superficial take on something, the sort of like pat somebody on the head. Well, yeah, no, of course it's simple. It's associationism, or like, who cares about kids or hunter gatherers, or like, all these aspects of life, or like, these don't matter. Actually, they really do. And
yeah,
like just taking a pause and being like, actually, what is morality? uh, is it all good? Like, that's not like, it's a virtue of like, Deb, your work, that it's doing that, even if it does come with this cost, as David's saying.
I'll just keep smiling and waving. Maybe like there'll be less disgust. but more value, right? So the editorship and then the textbook. I'll keep doing service.
Well, actually, one thing we had Michael Moncrief on Moncrief. Michael. I'm sorry, your name. I know. I always say it's the opposite of what I think, and so yeah, I know. But Michael does of psych and law, and we were talking about there's not a lot of people who do that intersection as well. But you're the sort of one of the, and probably the, in my mind, person doing that. Can you talk a little bit about either in the context of the incest, I mean, because work, or just the work that you've done at that intersection, because it's so important, and it's a really good example of real people, real stakes, real terrible stories, or just horrible things that were sort of unnecessary if you take a more sophisticated scientific view of people.
Yes. So I was thinking while you were talking, so I apologize. So
No,
I'm
that's
actually
great.
doing work with Keela. So Keela Williams and I are doing some work at the intersection. So I would
Mm.
say that there are three people who are more directly in that space. So you have Owen Jones, who's been doing a lot of that work, right? And so,
Mm.
and then Carlton, my student Carlton Patrick,
Mhm.
ECF, and then at Hamilton, you've got Keela Williams. And so, but there's a few others. So at ASU, there's Jess Salerno, although she's kind of more from the social psych tradition. And so, but she's another person doing some interesting work, to be sure. So Keela and I have been very interested in how you take the ASH style paradigm, right, and bring people around a table, and you just see how disgust starts to, work its magic, in influencing or extra influencing the way people respond and coordinate. So the question is, even in a jury setting, does disgust help coordinate people against things that might not necessarily even be disgusting or immoral? So that's one of the questions that we're asking there. And
So you're actually studying jurors?
Right now, it's just undergraduates
Mhm.
who are serving, and it's a lot of the work that Keela and her team at Hamilton have been doing.
Cool.
So that's kind of in progress, but getting out there to try and examine how. So I had wanted to do a test of judges
Mm.
at some point. So one of the earlier findings on the disgust stuff or the inbreeding avoidance was we had a measure of how. So it's really hard to get variation when you ask people how disgusting is it to kiss your brother and this all this stuff, right? So there's less variation. So we removed it and kind of went towards a morality, like how morally wrong do you find these behaviors? But now you're not asking about a particular opposite sex sibling. And so what we did is we basically looked at how activated your entire disgust psychology is towards siblings. So if you are if you're heterosexual and you're a female and you have no brothers, right? And so the idea that you don't have that would be me, which allows me to study this stuff and smile and laugh.
David, do you have
And
an
so,
opposite sex sibling?
I have two sisters. Yeah.
I have a sister
So
too. Yeah.
um, shall I continue?
Please.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, but it ends up that so if they are older siblings, the total duration of co-residence with all of them would actually kind of give a better, good index of how overall grossed out you are. So if you had one sibling, you lived them for older sibling 10 years versus two older siblings, you lived with combined 20 years, you'd expect a little bit more grossed outness for the person who had a total of 20 years of living with opposite sex siblings. And so that's exactly what we found. The idea that how morally wrong you found incest in general was predicted by how grossed out, the level of disgust that you develop towards your own family members. And
Cool.
while it would be just an extension into a different realm, I was always very curious, like, could I get a bunch of judges to fill out this questionnaire? Because I would then be very curious about, I don't know how often it has happened. I've been called and, provided expert testimony and discussed things, but it's rare. But when judges do come across cases of incest or abuse within the family, the question then is, which is obviously far more common than just incest, but you have, does the sexual aversion that's activated in the judges or the people making decisions influence at all the outcomes and the sentencing and so forth. So that was always been an interesting question as to how our psychology kind of gets into the legal system. I'd started this work with John Lanu a long time ago, but I don't think we ever finished it or got enough data, and so that was a long time ago. Yeah, but that's an interesting question that I've always wanted to answer.
For those cases where you were called in, did you? And you, I mean, you definitely don't have to go into specifics. But did you feel like was there sort of a naive realism or naivety about the psychology that, did you feel like, boy, it's a good thing I'm here to tell these people and to disabuse them of this idea? So for example, like, if people were reared apart, there's nothing wrong with them per se. It's just they don't have this evolutionarily valid cue of co-residence, or was it more complicated? Like, did you get a sense that, like, the lawyers or the judges were doing okay, or really the science needed to be informed, or to be in there, the law needed to be informed by the science much more than it was?
So one of the first cases that I was asked to write a brief for was a brother and sister had met each other during adulthood, and then realized that they were siblings, but they had fallen in love, had kids actually. One of them wasn't as healthy as the others, but there you go. That can happen anyway, just by luck of the draw, so to speak, but more common, more probable with inbreeding. And so he was jailed because of it. And so kids were taken away. And so one of the lawyers on the case was like, you need to be able to explain this to the judge, saying, they didn't grow up together. There's no disgust. Yeah. And so, what crime has been really committed here? And so I wrote this, and I never heard back. And then it was a long time, like years after I had seen the name of the lawyer, or I'd gotten curious what happened. I emailed him and said, after the case, we didn't get anywhere. Like, he's still in jail, or was in jail. And the lawyer quit. He got so upset about the system, because you had two decent human beings. And I mean, imagine someone knocking on your door, and you and I know it's not gonna happen, but oh, you and Annie end up being brother and sister. You'd be like, what? Just freaking out. It wouldn't change how you felt about her. You might say maybe we shouldn't have any more kids. Maybe we should hold here. But it wouldn't change how laws don't change, and that kind of explicit knowledge doesn't change necessarily how you feel about someone. I mean, the laws against homosexuality didn't change how gay men felt about one another. And but it's just, to me, it's always been, listen, I'm like the poster child for, legalizing adult consent. But it's at the same time, I guess I just want to be the poster child for legalizing sexual decisions among consenting adults. Yeah. And I think that it's a very interesting, that was interesting. The other two cases, actually, one was grandparents who were very concerned about their grandkids who were being abused by a stepfather. And so they had read something of mine, and they just wanted to understand what was going on. And then another guy was from the UK and was wondering if there was something wrong with him, because he had read my stuff and then was sent away for boarding school. But in the meantime, his parents had another child, never really interacted with her. He comes home, and there's a kind of cute girl living, and he's like, is it wrong of me to have these thoughts? And I was like, listen, I don't want to deal in right and wrong. I really don't like those words, but I can tell you at least one explanation for what might be happening. You never really know, but here's one possibility in terms of the aversion that likely didn't develop. You weren't, to your mind, she's effectively a stranger. You're evaluating her as you would any other female of that age. And so in any case, those are the kinds of things. But I have found that talking to people and walking them back from the ledge, like that guy, just kind of was like, okay, there's nothing wrong with me, but here's the situation. And now here's how I can move forward making decisions. The grandparents who were concerned about their grandkids, I was like, there's abuse, the daughter, things probably need to happen fast. So I wasn't part of any legal case there. And then the guy who was jailed for, being in love and marrying his sister. I don't know if they got married, but certainly having kids with a sister, that stings.
Yeah, it's pretty tragic. I mean, you think about just from an objective perspective, you understand the function of the disgust from a biological perspective.
Yeah.
And I mean, what is your understanding of the legal thing is sort of if or making it illegal, aside from the moralization of it, is the idea that if people are doing this, there's something wrong with them and they need state or institutional intervention? Like, why would it, like, is that in the law? Is there some explanation? Have you talked to lawyers about that?
I don't think I think it's just it messes up the family system, but I don't understand,
You don't need a moral argument over and above the disgust itself.
No, you don't. And so, but the thing is, it's like, but one could come up with the argument. It's like, but you're all more genetically related. You're like a beehive. Like, shouldn't that bring you closer together?
Taking the kids away also breaks up the family system.
Yeah. No, listen. I think that here was the argument that I asked Carlton if it was okay to put in the book, which is this: whether or not there's reasons to outlaw that type of union, put that one aside. But you can't use the genetic abnormalities in children as the reason for it, like the increased chance of having kids that are going to have problems because we let a lot of other people reproduce. And so that's a slippery slope, right? So women over 50 are reproducing, and that's an increased chance of autism and a whole bunch of other abnormalities. And it's like, where are you gonna stop that? So that to me is a very, very bad argument, right? That's starting to open a can of worms. So, but then the question is, as a society, what do we feel are rules that people will want to adhere to, want to respect? But the question is, why are we why are we putting them in place? And I just think that if disgust is part of the equation, I'm not saying it shouldn't be, but we should take a careful look at it.
Right. It's not a good moral compass in the quote unquote moral sort of. It's not a good objective compass.
No, it's not. So can I share with you a funny story about disgust?
Please.
So the development of this kind of moral system is really interesting. Like when kids start turning on that moral psychology, like 7, 8 kind of thing. Like they're just like, suddenly it's an interesting, like they're a social member. And now they probably out hunting and foraging and helping. And so now it's like they can be responsible for stuff, but it's very interesting how this kind of starts to turn on. And I remember my son, I used to make him eggs, and I grew up having jelly on my eggs. You might all find that disgusting, or ketchup or something, whatever, jelly or ketchup.
Yeah, ketchup's
like
great.
Yeah.
I like it on eggs.
My son loves ketchup on his eggs. Yeah.
But it might have been, maybe it was ketchup, but maybe it was jelly. I don't know. But it ends up, jelly and eggs actually turn eggs green. So your green eggs and ham. But so maybe I had some, but it was probably ketchup. Doesn't matter. But my son had a friend coming over, and I am eating eggs with something that's not typically at the table with eggs. Like, I forget if it's jelly or ketchup, doesn't matter. And out of nowhere, in front of this new friend, my son goes, "Mom, that's so disgusting." And I was like, I didn't know which direction to run in, like being proud, being like, what's that? Like data, like and this new kid. And I just was basically like, why? You like it too. So I was like, if I'm going down, you're going down with me, kid. But the idea that it was just very interesting, like something that was abnormal. Yeah. So that he had to point out, like, I don't do that. That's disgusting. And so I think every time I hear those terms, I'm always very cautious, or I kind of bring it to the surface, like, well, why is that disgusting? And why can't I do it? Anyway.
It's really interesting. Yeah.
So,
where do you want to go?
All right. I got a direction we could go. Okay. So, as you know, we recently, a few years ago, came out of a huge global pandemic,
Tell me more about.
COVID-19.
I didn't hear about this. Tell
You
me.
didn't hear about
No, I
this?
didn't hear
Oh,
about it. I must have missed that. I must have.
Woke up.
Yeah.
So here is a really good example of a environmental stimulus with huge, relevance to evolutionary psychology. It happened before our eyes. Coming out of this experience, what do you think we learned from it as psychologists? I mean, we learned a lot of things about ourselves and about our, capacity to, be indoors and be away from social life. But you would think that this would be a good natural experiment to study, responses to pathogens in real time. What do you think you learned from this experience? What did the evolutionary psychology community learn from it? Has there been any interesting data coming out of it? So, what's your take on this?
I've takes at many levels. So at the scientific level, I found it very interesting to kind of look at some of the effects of COVID. But I will also say that I wasn't impressed by much of the data in terms of like how, like, I don't know that I saw anything that convinced me that the pandemic caused shifts in disgust sensitivity across the board. Like, I don't think that, but that said, people were across the board, I think, more reactive to everything, and just on a heightened sensitivity to every type of fear. So, I mean, like, so I don't, at EHB, we got tons of papers about COVID and disgust. And so my memory of things is basically an average of all those papers, and many of them just weren't all that great. So if there are some really good studies out there that showed how disgust kind of really did push things around. So at Cornell, you have David Pietraszewski, right, who's done these great things about you put a fart spray, or you do things that disgust people and it pushes people's morality around. But it's like, it's not really that big an effect. It's not like I cause you to be disgusted and then like you're gonna pick up all the picket signs and start marching. Like, it's not like that. But it does push on the gas ever so slightly. So yeah, so from a scientific point of view, I think we found that it pushes things ever so slightly. More jarring to me during COVID was the coalitional stuff, and just how nasty people got. So it actually, people were nastier, but then to their own group, they were nicer. Like, I think you saw both things happening.
Interesting.
At least that was my sense, that I just sensed that there was a lot more kind of just the rhetoric. Just, I couldn't even watch the news. It was awful. Right. And then, but then of the people in your social circle, like, bonds were forged, they were strengthened, they were, some relationships you cleaned out some relationships that perhaps, you got good information that they were no longer there for you during times of actual need. So I see it as like both things happened, like social bonds strengthened if you had them, because if you didn't, then I think you were in trouble. And then, but also I think that the coalitional aspects of, what is this? How dangerous is it? Where did it come from? Can it really spread? And then, the personal freedom stuff, is always, that's something that bugged a lot of people. So it was a disaster. I'm impressed we came out of it.
I think it affected
part
everybody.
Of it is, it affected everybody and everything. And I will say, like, it was scary. It was really scary. I remember thinking at the beginning of the pandemic, like, we need to get another fridge. We need to go like get meat and start freezing it. And, my husband at the time was like, what is wrong with you? I'm like, human nature, like, watch out. Like, everything's going to be gone.
Have you seen apocalypse movies? Yeah.
I was so scared. just thinking about how bad it could get. And, I'm in Florida, and like, it can go off the rails really fast here. And so it really made me think about like, oh my gosh, this is the Wild West, this event, like, like hunker down. Where are our like kin? Where are our weapons? Like, where's our food? And it really put my mind, I mean, maybe that's where the female mind goes. And he was just like, you're off your rocker. And so maybe I was, but I got nervous. I got very nervous initially. But in any case, yeah. What do you think?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I remember.
Course,
So, I mean, so my take on it. So, I mean, I was looking at it through the lens of my theoretical preconceptions. And so, as you know, I have this paper in Psych Inquiry called The Alliance Theory of Political Belief Systems. And the argument there is that political ideologies don't really emerge from these deep-seated individual differences and core values that are posited by a lot of psychologists. So there's a lot of work by Jonathan Haidt and his collaborators arguing that one of the key bases of conservatism is disgust, that conservatives are higher in disgust sensitivity. They're more sensitive to contamination and pollution and purity, and it's all stemming from this disease psychology. And so for me, like a big prediction of that approach is that you would expect conservatives to be the ones who would be really up in arms about the pandemic, wanting to shut things down, wanting to be the conservative ones. And yet the opposite happened. And for me, that was a huge victory for my theoretical approach, which suggests that these kinds of political opinions are about shifting alliances and the strategic interests of each coalition, which can at times be random and can shift around unpredictably. I think the parties could have easily taken opposing stances depending on who was in office at the time that the pandemic started and what positions they happened to take. People follow the leader. So I think the polarization around this issue could have easily been flipped. And so for me, it was a big victory for alliance theory, and that everyone was predicting that conservatives would be on one end of this issue, and they were on the opposite end of this issue. So that was what I took away from it. But I also remember I was pretty surprised.
Can I ask what are some of the explanations or the pushback that you've gotten? Like, well, what you saw was actually because, like, what did you hear that that tried to contradict your findings? I agree with you. I think your findings are beautiful. Like, I think that's perfect. But what did people say against it? Like to say, oh, well, actually, you're wrong because.
I haven't actually. Mostly, I've found that people just kind of surrender. They're just like, yeah,
I'm confabulating. Yes, it's very.
It's really hard to like. Yeah,
you are charming.
People are like, I'm so tired from COVID. It was just like,
it's a pretty hard case to make that, like, conservatism is all about disease and contamination and purity, but they're the ones who are, avoiding vaccines and wanting to be, more out there in the midst of a pandemic. Yeah, it's just really hard to square that circle. I haven't seen anyone do a convincing case for it.
Well, we don't include data that doesn't support our theory.
It's what is that? The Douglas Adams. It's someone else's problem cloaking device where it just sort of it just is a cloaking device where it just creates it's someone else's problem, right? So things that are inconsistent with the way you think, you just kind of don't see it. So that was the conceit of the invisibility cloaking device in Douglas Adams.
True, but so David, but the thing is that, well, whatever, I can't say David. And so
we've been going with I'm Dave and David is David, just for clarity. Yeah, to David P.
So David, but the thing is, you still see reports about discuss sensitivity and political spectrum, and it's like. So apparently so now I know who's going to be a reviewer on all those papers.
Oh no. No, that's there. No, so I have a story about that. So I think most of that is driven by sexual disgust. And sexual disgust, in turn, is a marker of one's reproductive strategy. So if you're pursuing a particular kind of monogamous, committed, high fertility, traditionally gender division of labor reproductive strategy, which is more common among social conservatives than social liberals, sexual disgust and disgust toward promiscuity and short-term sexual relationships, that is a fundamental part of that reproductive strategy. And that is a fundamental part of the conservative political coalition. I think we ought to think of people pursuing that reproductive strategy as an interest group, as a voting bloc within the Republican Party that is driving policy. And so that's the story I would tell there, that it's really just sexual disgust that these correlations are picking up on. And insofar as mating strategies are correlated with other kinds of disgust, which you would expect them to be, if you are more grossed out in general and more, you think you're more vulnerable to disease in general, well, a big transmitter of diseases is sex. So you're gonna, want to be less promiscuous. So I think it's all connected to mating strategies, reproductive strategies, and that would be the story I'd tell about it.
I like that.
Super cool. Deb, you mentioned EHB, Evolution Human Behavior, which is one of, if not the preeminent flagship journal of evolutionary psychology, also evolutionary behavioral sciences. There are other journals, but EHB is very much the really, in many ways, the home of HBES, the Human Behavior Evolution Society. It's the journal. You have been the editor for how long now?
A long time.
Okay, a long time. Yeah.
I'm coming to the end. Don't
Okay.
worry.
I'm curious, that's a unique perspective that not many people get. It gives you some perspective sort of on the process of a journal and what that's like. And not everybody gets a chance to do that. It gets you a sense of the trajectory of people trying to publish at this journal. There's actually, I can think of several questions, right? But I think, one of the things we've talked about in this, this podcast is how EvPsych is going, or how the evolutionary behavioral sciences are going. We talked about that earlier and when we were talking. Your experience as being the editor, are there certain things that you feel like, as you said, you're winding down, that you've been reflecting on, or that you think are useful or interesting for people who don't have that perspective to know, that we wouldn't know, or maybe even wouldn't know to ask? Like, are you looking and being like, wow, I can't believe all these people who do X are trying to like publish here, or I've really noticed a change in this, or, is there anything like that? No is fine. Yeah.
There are certain like hot topics that keep kind of coming at EHB. So, but as with any particular topic, like there's like the meat, right? And then once the main finding has been found, and there's a lot of N+1 studies that kind of just, I'm replicating. So replications are of course always valuable.
Yeah.
And so in general, I've been very pleased with the quality that's been submitted to EHB. I would like to see more work from anthropologists, and so I had a couple special issues that I hoped would spark some of that initially. So there was that weird 20 years since that weird paper was published that that Corinne and Joe and Ara Norenzayan, they had all come in to guest edit. And that was one of the most successful special issues. I mean, that's one of the reasons why our impact factor skyrocketed. And so but then we had Aaron Lukaszewski. He did a whole bunch of, from the field special issues that also were really wildly successful. But I've been going out to the areas that I find interesting and trying to, market and advocate, like, you want to do something here, and would you organize something, and so forth. And so, I mean, that's what's led to what's coming up in terms of the number of special issues. So I'm going to tell you, because I'd like to advertise all of them so that people know what's coming up, which is, so we have a special issue on friendship that Jamie Krems is organizing. There's one that's focusing on Latin America research. So all of the evolutionary behavioral science that's coming out of Latin, not all of it, but a lot of it that's coming out of Latin America, South America. And then there's also one on cognitive development that I'm extremely happy about and I'm looking forward to, because that's an area that we desperately need more of. There's one on, I had put out a call for like personality and clinical kind of individual differences, clinical aspects, just to kind of see what was out there. It's not a huge collection of papers, but there's been a lot of interesting papers on dark triad, psychopathy, and so forth. I have another one on singlehood that's being put together. We'll see where that goes. That was the proposal, so I'm also very interested in what people would propose. And then my goal, really, as the editor, was to start more conversations and to get people engaged in talking back and forth. So there's a great new paper on the evolution of culture, or what cultural evolution means and what it means to study culture. And so I was hoping that we'd have a nice back and forth. And so it's just a matter of whether the main players actually want to engage and start the dialogue, right? Because if everyone's saying the same thing, it's not fun. But for future generations, it's really nice to kind of see where the disagreement is. So in a BBS style format, having these conversations, I think is a lot of fun. There was just one about war, the evolution of war. Like, is it a social construct that's based on the need for modern resources, or is it more of just a function of like modern nation states or whatever, versus more of a deep psychological history? And so actually, Lita just republished the evolution, the cognitive foundations of war. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah. Great paper.
And so that'll be part of that as well. So there's kind of a nice chunk of papers now talking about and debating about the psychology of war and warfare and team psychology. So that's actually really exciting. So that's been the great part about being an editor, is just saying, what areas do we need more of? So I think that, I'm all ears in terms of like what could we do, and especially now that they're doing virtual special issues. So what would be interesting? I think that the application of evolutionary psychology is something we haven't yet talked about. Well, we have in terms of the legal stuff, but one of the things that, for instance, I have found really impressive with some social psychologists, particularly Bob Cialdini, right? So he has a model of full psychology, right? So you go out there, you look out in the world, what's going on, bring it into the lab, study it, put it back in the real world, see how it performs. And it's really a great model. I know it's difficult because we tend to be in the weeds, like can't take a WTR ratio out, and take it for a spin in the real world. But the question is, can we come up with strategies and research programs that allow us to be slightly more applied? And then and I think that's the next step of things, because then it's like, oh, it matters, right? So I think that takes us into level 3 of, oh, we knew it all along. We've been doing it all along. And so I think that's where that would be important. And I think that there are areas that need evolutionary psychology. So leadership and other types of, even kind of adding evolutionary tones into the social influence literature, I think is important. So, but taking that model of full psychology and looking at how we can actually get out there into the real world, I think is important. Obviously, evolutionary medicine is doing all, and evolutionary psychiatry, but how are people getting trained in those areas?
Really cool. Yeah.
So, in my opinion, Evolution and Human Behavior is the best evolutionary social science journal in existence.
I'll pay you. Deb will pay you later, David.
It's the one that I think puts out the highest quality stuff. I won't name names, but I'm occasionally embarrassed by some of the stuff that comes out and some of the other EvoPsych journals. I consider Evolution and Human Behavior to be a cut above the rest.
Get really good reviews. I always know at EHB I'm going to get good reviews.
Yeah, totally.
We try.
And
It's hard. People say no a lot.
yeah, I'm curious at how you have done it. Like what has your strategy been for maintaining quality control and making sure that you don't publish garbage, and just maintaining the integrity and reputation of the journal, because it doesn't seem like an easy thing to do. How do you do it?
So I think the main answer is that it's actually a good question. And two balancing questions I ask myself. One is, does this push our knowledge in this area forward in a substantial way? Or enough so that it rounds out something that is, that I think people would find interesting. I get nervous about poorly designed studies. And truth be told, a lot of papers get rejected because A, they're not evolutionary.
Mm-hmm.
B, there's no rationale for the hypotheses, or the rationale is incorrect, or it's been outdated in the sense of it's been a controversy that's already been established and we've already solved it. So there's no basis for this particular hypothesis. Every now and then I'll get a paper that says, I've got a new theory of human nature. Let me tell you about it. And so, I have a good file drawer of special papers.
Or there
Probably got a lot
figures
of-
this used to happen at the conference too. There'd always be a poster of sort of like glowing chakras. That doesn't happen anymore, but the early days when there were.
Let me tell you, I look over my shoulder now more than I ever used to. I was like, I don't know who's taking their medication this morning or not. So anyway, but the thing is, like, there's also a lot of people like reinventing the wheel, like evolutionary psychology that those Santa barbarians think that they figured out. That's all crap. I've got a new theory. And I'm like, oh, that looks exactly like what I learned. And so I enjoy those. But I'm just happy we've all kind of, triangulated onto the same ideas. But here's actually really where I balance it all out. So I'm an adaptationist, and so I realize there's an adaptationist running the journal. So I'm very concerned about having things that contribute to understanding the design of the mind. Every now and then there'll be a paper that I think, ooh, it's not adaptationist, but boy, is this cool. Like, it's kind of cool stuff. And I will send it out for review as something like extra. And so typically reviewers are like, what is this? No. And then it's usually a decision where I decide whether it goes in or not. And sometimes I've decided yes, and sometimes no. Ultimately, I think about the history of science. And I think about, I am the gatekeeper of some sort, but let the history of science, sort it all out. So if papers come in that, every now and then there's one that's only incrementally or might have, one study with only 40 people in it, like, but it was done really well. Like, let the history of science figure out whether or not that's something that's going to actually, move forward or not. So I'm very cautious because I realize I'm biased in terms of my view on the world. By biased, I mean discerning. I'm discerning in terms of what I think, contributes to cognitive science in that way. So, there's a lot of research you haven't seen in the journal. Like, when was the last time you saw a facial resemblance paper? Yeah. And so I'm not saying facial resemblance isn't interesting. I'm just saying that I think that the idea as a kinship system, it's just wrong. It's wrong, and there's good reason why it's wrong. And I'll write a paper as to why it's wrong. And so I just don't think it's a good kinship cue. Mm-hmm. And I have not been convinced of any of the data. They're explained otherwise. And I just don't, like, if I thought something was, so life history theory is another interesting topic. Like, that seems to have taken over the journal in some respect. And I mean, as a scientist, listen, as evolutionary psychologist, I think, isn't that what I do? I'm very confused about life history theory. I think to myself, I'm an adaptationist. I'm concerned about how it develops and how it calibrates. Isn't that what this is? Like, so I get a little bit confused, but I realize there's a vernacular out there. There's people having a conversation. So life history theory gets its papers out there. And there was a whole special issue out there, right, on life history theory that dealt with a lot of the debates. I don't know how much more we need on life history theory, right? So in terms of those types of conditions. And until someone starts, and I've almost like had it up to here with it. So until someone actually gives me a model of what the hell they're talking about, like, I'm just like, I've let you guys play around enough. Like, hasn't someone come up with a model? Like, what is this that we're talking about? If I can't imagine a model, that's kind of one of my litmus tests of like, you know, is this a thing? Is there there, you know? And so, but again, I would say if either of you stepped into the role as editor, it's not that difficult to see the kinds of papers that are, you know, even, I mean, like there's certain ones that you're just like, you know, that's not off topic. It's just not even wrong. And then there's some ones that are like, it's good, but there's problems with it. And I guess this is what I wanted to say. I'm getting older, and so I'm getting softer in my older age. But I believe that there are a lot of papers that are valuable, and they might not have gotten it all right, but they've gotten a lot of it right. And that's why I say the history of science will start to kind of shape all of it up. Meta-analyses and other techniques and other AI functions that have yet to be born, you know, we'll try to kind of sift through all of this stuff. But so long as it's been done in good faith and actually done well and can be replicated, like even if there's a little theoretical, like I wouldn't have written it like that, but I would have come up with this hypothesis, and there's not like, you know, so long as they include nods to those kinds of things, I tend to be very happy with getting people's hard work out there. And so I see it as a gatekeeper, but also promoting the next generation of scientists, right? So making sure that there's publications that are getting junior scholars jobs.
What do you think is the challenge for not our generation collectively, but those young junior evolutionary psychologists or people who maybe are outside or adjacent who are going into it? If you had to say something to them, or like what do you think their mission is in their cohort?
I would like to see greater engagement with the information processing side of things. I think a lot of good evolutionary psychology gets done without it. I think better evolutionary psychology can get done with it. I don't know if that's just because that's what I like. So it's very possible. So, and I fully admit that, and I'm very self-aware. So I just want to, like, I fully understand that I have these biases, but the next generation of scientists, of evolutionary psychologists, it's really critical they understand the level of cognitive program. And that's what's important. My goal at EHB is to potentially try and publish some of the greatest hits again. So the war paper, you know, so I'm looking for everything. I'm digging through drawers, like, you know, we have, if there's an anniversary coming up of a particular paper, like I would love to have a discussion between, and I'm hoping this paper by Nicholas Baumard is actually on culture, instigates a conversation about culture, because I think that would be a great back and forth between like Rob Boyd, Pete Richardson, and Lita and Pascal, like, and, you know, and so being able to have that conversation. The thing that frustrates me a lot is, why haven't we moved past this learning and culture speak? I couldn't be more frustrated by it. Like it's due to culture. I just want to be like, I don't know what that means. Like, I don't know what, like, give me, like, flesh that out, like, at all. like, and what's more importantly, like I'm more frustrated with people being rude to me for for actually asking that question,
Right.
of saying like, what, like I'm on board, like I understand, like I get what you say culture is, but that isn't that something to be explained. That's not an explanatory, that's not powerful as an explanatory force. That's to be explained.
Yeah.
And I would like, if one breakthrough for the field would be to say, we are the field. Evolutionary psychology is the field of culture and learning, and we specify how all that happens. Like, I adopt all their language and start using it. It's like they forget the adapted mind, psychology and the generation of what, like,
Yeah. Culture.
Yeah.
that's exactly. And it's like, I'm frustrated when people are like, you don't consider culture. It's like, no, we're the science of culture. And that's what I'd like to see people take, but from a cognitive science perspective. So that's what I'd like to see far more of. So I think there's a lot of room to grow there. And I'd love to see it spread into anthropology. I'd like to see us take back anthropology and actually have a real science of anthropology.
Yeah, we've actually, I've been struck with, because the way we've been, David and I have been doing this is just inviting interesting, fun people, that, especially people who are either well known, like yourself, or maybe even some people who were less well known, especially for people who are not monetizing EP on the internets or things like that. And a lot of
Hey,
people
don't fault people for monetizing.
No,
you
we
cannot fault
will.
people for
Please
monetizing.
we might have a Patreon by the time this comes out, so or better. No, for sure. No, not at faulting at all. But I mean, what I mean by that is, my point is, we've had a lot of anthropologists on. Like I've been struck with how much, and maybe this is part of, John Tooby was in an anthro department. The CP was in an anthro building. So much. I was an anthro minor. If you look down in the CP, in the same way as UCLA, David, right? I mean, you were talking about, it's just anthro-psych, sociology, communication. I mean, it's really in the water, and you really lose something in Deb. I mean, I talked about this a little bit before, but I have been, after I left UCSB, I was other places, and if I was in a psych area department where there was not anthro, people would just say things, and I'd be like, I became the amateur anthropologist, where I'd be like, no, actually, there's a culture where this isn't true, right? Like, you're not getting at human nature, you're not getting at the level of the underlying design. You're assuming things that are very particular to a particular culture. So yeah, no, there's been a lot of, to have anthro connected, I think, is even showing up in this, and even what we're doing here, more than I even realized.
Well, that's good. I mean, I've been reading a lot of Tubi's Edge pieces, but
those are bangers. They're all bangers. Yeah.
I know. I made a little booklet of them, and so they're fantastic. Yeah, and so it's the idea that you're not looking at the right layer. So the right layer and the universality is going to happen at the layer of the cognitive programs, right? Not at the layer of whatever is manifest. And so,
yeah, it's such a deep principle, that layer of invariance. David and I talked about that one of the episodes, just like understanding what it is. That's such a deep insight that I think John put so well. What you just said, it's so easy to say, but it sounds kind of jargony, but that you have to capture the right layer, the right level to find the principle.
But to get there, you need to consider biology and physics, and it's like, and I would love to see the social sciences slightly more well versed in those areas. And I don't mean any type of like reductionism. I don't. I think that there's a lot of things to be studied at all different levels of organization, but I think how could it hurt, right? And so, in any case, I think that's one of the things I've liked most about EvPsych is the physics of it.
And that was something I'm always, John even said he wanted to be, or thought about doing physics. I think, I don't know, you tell me, Deb. You guys did a sort of tribute thing for John in AHB. Is that right? I think I can. Yeah.
No, it was I tried to coin. I don't know if it's going to take, but kind of the modern cognitive synthesis, right? Which is what I'd like to think of EP as, right? So it's not the modern synthesis, it's not the cognitive revolution, but it kind of joins the two into the next big thing. So
That's
the modern cognitive synthesis, you start using that term.
Yeah, modern cognitive synthesis. I'll say it a lot.
I like that.
Was there anything in the course of doing that, John passing away, we've been reflecting on a lot about that. Was there anything in the course of doing that special issue that sort of surprised you, or was there anything that sort of stood out that either was like, oh yeah, no, that's John, and that's something I want to like embody going forward? Like, for example, I think this is normal when somebody passes away, you think about like, okay, there's a hole in the universe, their shape, and there's certain things about them that need to continue, and what in my measly way can I do? Like, that's something I've been thinking about.
And what did you come up with?
Ultimately it's theory first adaptationism, of just sort of like when I sit down like with a decision about like what paper to write, it's sort of, how would John start this paper, or how would he think about this? And maybe
That's
write
a dangerous question.
Yeah. And
WWJD, what would John do?
Yeah, maybe edit the complexity of the sentence down a little bit more towards how Lita would do. But I like to think, I heard on the YouTube video, like Marvin Minsky talked about, like he had a couple people in his head, when he would write a paper, like he would sort of channel different people, like what he said what he learned from working with people, like very famous people, was how they thought. And so when he writes something, he's like, well, how would Isaac Asimov write this, or people like that. And for me, like I have a Tubi, like what would Tubi write here? How would he think about this? For my part. And I think that for me, that is as David kind of laughed about one episode or a couple ago, start with the Big Bang first. Like, I think one of the things for me, listening to John, and I watched some videos again after he passed away, just to like listen to him. It's really, for me at least, the huge distinction was, without EvPsych and John really did this thing, was you don't accept the built-in assumptions of the world that are delivered by our folk psychology. So something is intrinsically beautiful, no, you're not allowed to think that. You have to start replicator dynamics. So there's no such thing as beauty. You have to build beauty. Beauty has to be explained. It's just like what you said about culture. And so for me, what John really did was just eviscerate the idea that you can have a good science that starts assuming that beauty is intrinsic and doesn't need an explanation and doesn't even need a definition. It's just obvious, and that idea that you have to take everything, you have to deconstruct every psychological essentialistic idea, to replicator dynamics, to a relationship out in the world, and build it up that way. For me, that's what John was embodied, I think. Like that's my 2 cents. Yeah.
Brad Duchesne, who was in the lab maybe before you got there, he said something if you can imagine, I actually read his comprehensive exams in my second year, so because they all got kind of passed down. But he had a great saying that I think embodies a lot of John. He said, there's no such thing as a computational free lunch. And I remember that. It's a great saying, but the idea that there's nothing comes for free here. And so if you're not specifying how it happens, then you've missed something, or something's incomplete. And so I was working on the Disgust stuff with Josh Hyber for a while. And we had, the 3 functions of disgust. And we talked about, at that point in time, it was, pathogen, sexual, and moral. And I'll tell you, that paper actually was 2/3 done for a very long time, because pathogen disgust, sexual disgust, was very clear as to, I hadn't started modeling anything, but it was very clear, at least in my head, how one possibly could. But the moral disgust, I was like, I don't even know what to begin. Like, this is, And then Carlton and I got the book deal to write Objection. And then we started off, and there was actually a whole different book before the one that came out. It was basically pathogen, sexual, and moral. And then we started to write all of it. And I got to the moral section, and I was like, well, first off, I realized pathogen, sexual, that wasn't exactly, the sex stuff worked, but it was more, the pathogen was the eating. It's food psychology and contact psychology. But then when you start to write about the moral disgust, I was like, in the same like nitty gritty information processing way, thinking about like how I would build it. I came to a complete blank. I was like, moral disgust. I was like, I don't even know what the inputs are. Like, I don't even know what the external inputs are in order to kind of generate this moral disgust. I was like, I'm thinking about this all wrong. And so then I just kind of, and that's when I read their Groups in Mind paper. And that's, and that started me off as on a completely different, that's such a great paper. Like that's the key. That's like the key to the universe. And so, but I would say that's what got me thinking a lot about social value in these moral projects and how disgust can kind of get in there that way. But with John, listen, I mean, you asked me about the EHP special issue. I'll be honest with you. I'm like amnesic. I think it was so traumatic. It was traumatic. It was emotionally stressful. Had a lot of other stuff going on in my world. And I just don't, it's like losing a parent. It's like, how do you, it was substantial. It was profound. And it's like, I still can't believe it. Like, I didn't really get to talk to him except at conferences, but I knew he was out at work. So in my mind, I'm like, he's still working somewhere. Yeah. We'll see that book someday. Yeah, exactly. But it's really sad. But for me, I think the tradition that I, it is the physics of it, right? So really kind of breaking things down in terms of not assuming anything, assuming nothingness. And so that's how I come to altruism too. Like, we're not killing and eating each other. So let's start, instead of like morality is cooperation, I don't want to start there. I want to start with, how come we're not killing and eating each other? I'd rather start there and kind of come from a very different angle. And I think that his perspective allowed us to kind of, entertain that stuff. But his idea of entertain all hypotheses, right, and start from all angles, I think was also something that was pretty critical. But it's super sad. But then, listen, you have Don Simons, Don Brown, Knapp, and then more recently Helen Fisher. It's just a lot of folks, from the general area. So I think traditions need to, we're at a new stage of like, oh my gosh, like there's a lot of ideas, and suddenly now like there's people who are not around to discuss them with. How do we make sure that they get memorialized and cataloged so that they can be taught? I think that's new for our field right now, that this is kind of what's happening. So the idea of this podcast is fantastic. And David, I know you have your, everything is bullshit, which is fantastic. But the idea that these ideas are living on in a variety of different ways, and so being more creative and doing things like this, I think is going to be great. And there are other folks doing podcasts, interviewing people from evolutionary psych, but doing this, I think is a great service for the field and for students who actually are going to get to hear from folks.
Yeah, it's strange to think. I know John he had something, everything we think is right is wrong, or something to that effect on his computer.
Feels like that every now and then.
Hey man, everything is bullshit is just echoing that. That quote,
exactly,
really.
Exactly. And the other one I remember was that the truth, like every generation of scientists, like the truth resides way further out than any, fight in science typically is. So there's usually like two sides to a scientific debate. And usually the argument is, well, truth is somewhere in the middle. And, I'm not putting it eloquently, but the idea is that actually reality is so far outside the bounds of what either side is arguing. And that was another thing that, John, he just always had that wry smile of sort of, I think whenever he sort of saw that, there'd be like a student presenting something and there'd be a debate. And then John would just sort of have his wry smile and sort of proceed physics first to say why, in fact, probably the whole debate doesn't capture in a nice way, like not in a deflationary way at all, but just sort of like, no, in fact, the reality is way further out than we think.
Yeah, I think he will be missed. He will be missed. So no, but the edge stories are, stories literally from the edge. I think it's great because that's him raw. That's no peer review. It's no Lita, like, you can't say it that way. It's just pure raw, John.
Yeah.
Yep. You get the raw, you get those lists. My favorite part of the To Be Cosmides writing is they'll have a list of examples to illustrate a point, and the list will always go on 5 times longer than you expect it to. And you see that especially in his edge pieces. He just the deliciously long, winding lists of examples. That's something that I've tried to emulate a bit in my writing, but I was always the lists. Yeah, I've always been a fan of that rhetorical technique.
No, it's good. I think the one trap we all have to be careful about is not writing exactly like him. Like, I think we need to write for like,
exactly.
Mere mortals. And so
that is true. I personally love his writing, but I definitely recognize that it's not for everyone, and a lot of people are alienated by it.
There's not a lot of colorful Tix style figures in those papers. It's a lot of black and white text. It's not a cartoon.
No, it's meaty. It's all meat, and so. But I appreciate that. One area that I think would be really interesting. Vita actually was the author of it, and I think it was in the internal regulatory variables paper. She talks about consciousness as a data format.
Mm-hmm.
And so, she's busy doing a whole bunch of other stuff. The idea of asking her, hey, do you mind writing that up as like a bigger, piece? But I would love to see at EHB, like someone tackle, consciousness as what does it mean that consciousness is a data format? Like, that's just like, that's really kind of a cool sort of, like there's certain things that that are required to be noticed. I don't know. It's very interesting. And so I would love to see that. But then, Dave, you are tackling free will. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I just wrote the response to the reviews at Psych Review. We'll see what happens with it. But because I don't mind negative reviews, but the negative reviews were actually like inaccurate, right? So it was a pretty
that's what you get for not going to EHB.
No, exactly. I'm actually writing an EHB. I'm actually writing a paper for EHB right now. So the title is The Evolution of Autonomy. So
looking forward to reading that one.
Yeah.
Speaking of conscious, I'm taking a crack at it. I have a
by
paper.
By being conscious.
By being conscious first and foremost. Although occasionally I like to be unconscious in the evening if I can manage with my daughter. But
sleep is hard to come by. Yes,
it is. But yeah, no, I got an outline. I got a theory. I got maybe 20% of the paper written.
That's great.
Yeah. So
I look forward to it. Well, then I see this is the fun part about it. And so having fun with ideas, and I think floating things and seeing where they go. I have no problem with EHB publishing all theoretical stuff. Like, it doesn't need to be like, as long as it's good and interesting, like there's no limit. People are always like, can I write it? Is it okay if it's theoretical? I'm like, it's great. It's fantastic. Like, like this is the theory journal. Like we should be making sure we pin down a lot of stuff solidly here. So I find that interesting. But in terms of I'm just curious, Dave, what you think about. I've been very interested. So obviously in the morality stuff, but will and responsibility, like terms like responsibility and blame, just to take two.
Yeah.
Like, if it's the case that there's cause and effect in the universe, And if it's the case that you couldn't have done otherwise, like you just all lined up, like cause and effect, like you just wind up toy, there you go, there's Deb. And so you can predict what she's going to do in an hour. Yeah. That would be me. I'm talking about myself in the third person, not good. And so I would say, where did these terms come from? And if I had to fit them into my framework about what I thought morality was and social value and coordination points and all this stuff, then they're really just ways of allowing people to easily coordinate. It's just, I mean, so what would it mean to say that a person who does something wrong couldn't have done otherwise because the universe was set in motion and atom A affected atom B, like, you know, like in a exactly causal sense. Yeah. Then you can't blame anyone for anything. And responsibility is bogus and weird. But because we seek and are thirsty for ways to figure out how to go after people, that these are fantastic terms that hook into the psychology of you're responsible, that's blame, this, you know, like, and so, but I guess I'm wondering, like, is that what those words are? Just easy coordination points?
Yeah, I think, I mean, yes, I think there's an additional thing, which is that it's about intervention and what can be intervened upon in particular ways. So, for example, if I'm treating you not well, Deb, my welfare trade-off ratio is too low for you. That's one scenario. Another scenario, a good example, a counterexample is something like I have a broken bone, let's say, right? There are things, Deb, that you can do to me to try to change my welfare trade-off ratio with respect to you. So, for example, you can talk to me, communicate any number of ways. You know,
punch him in the face.
Exactly. You can either impose costs or upregulate cooperation or say, hey, like I'm a more valuable partner, whatever. You can talk to me, you can try to convince me, you can do all kinds of things to change the setting in my head that is my welfare trade-off ratio with respect to you. And then if you do that, that will change my behavior and the outcomes for you going forward.
Okay.
None of those apply to the broken bone. So no matter what you try to do, I mean, assuming I'm doing everything that will heal my broken bone as quickly as possible, there's nothing you can do to convince me, for example, to heal my broken bone, right? I can't convince myself, right, to like heal my broken bone. It's just going to take time. It's not within the purview precisely of like my planning and motivational systems to be able to do anything about the speed at which my bone heals, you know, leaving aside these things of like, you know, don't walk on it, put it in a cast, go to the doctor, whatever. And the idea is then that even though it's true that everything is sort of causally, the full nexus of causal determinism or things going forward, we have evolved entries for the kinds of things that if we do intervene upon, we can change outcomes. And so, for example, what it means that somebody is responsible or we're blaming them, or we're communicating an attempt to intervene upon them such that we're either communicating to the person, it's an attempt to actually change, for example, motivation planning, goal weights, et cetera, for the future.
But why? Doesn't my anger do that? What, I guess I'm wondering what does it do above and beyond my anger?
Well, in this case, it's just that what the entry is for is an evaluation of, like, for example, is the person responsible or not? Which can come into anger, it could come into coalitional things, but it's part of the evaluation of whether or not, for example, you're making a claim about, if you're saying, I mean, there's a difference between the representation and like saying something out loud. But if you're saying like, Dave, no, you're responsible, you're treating me badly, you're responsible for it. It's doing a couple things. One is it's telling me I'm not doing this, treating you well. And so that has the effect of like the anger thing, right? You're trying to recalibrate that too. But it's also a claim about, it's not falling into the broken bone category. And that might be if you're saying it out loud, that's also, that gets into this coalitional thing, right? Where, and this is where you have groups of people who differ in sort of saying like, should we are people who commit crimes responsible? Meaning, is it efficacious or moral to use punishment to intervene upon them to try to change how they behave going forward? And so, so the attribution that somebody's responsible entails certain implicit, often consequences, like we should punish them or do something different as them as an individual, as opposed to like social thing, right? Like, so change social institutions. So there's people who aren't desperate enough to rob people versus you have to punish somebody severely so they don't punish or they don't rob again. Does it answer the question? I mean, it's the reason why there's that entry, the claim in the paper is the reason why something like responsibility or will has to do with the attribution of where the a leverage point in changing that outcome exists. And there's strong selection pressures on, or there would be selection pressures to sort of note the WTR kinds of things that you can intervene upon by planning and deliberation and things, motivation, versus things like broken bones, roughly speaking. Right?
I am going to have to be further convinced, because I guess I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I guess what I'm thinking is, I don't care about your rehabilitation.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think blame and responsibility are for your rehabilitation. I just think it's for my usage to coordinate people to come after you. Like, and if you're responsible, and then we can get rid of you and ship you off to an island, there's no rehabilitation there. There's no chance of but I do wonder the extra thing that you're talking about. We agree in terms of it's a coordination thing, but the idea that it's a mechanism that then says it's for your readjustment, your re-education.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't disagree. I mean, let me be clear. Like, I think there's a larger the attribution that the agent is responsible is the full subset, but then that might apply to like your child, and your child, the planning and assessment systems that led your child to get injured, the attribution they are responsible for getting hurt as opposed to as an accident or somebody else did it to them, then evokes in you hey, by the way,
the causal chain of things.
You should have paid attention to this, pay attention to it more. There's another part of that Venn diagram then is not your child, but also like people that you already are in a coalitional antipathy with, and then you can use it exactly in this way. So I don't disagree that one of the outcomes of the responsibility attribution can be alliance E, and in fact the other way around, where if you're already interested in having an alliance go after these people, there's an appetite for, just like there's an appetite for disgust, to even hallucinate disgust, it's to hallucinate responsibility or blame, right? In order for then to be a basis of ganging up on them. So no, I definitely
you think it falls out of causal language. So what led to blame and responsibility is a way to pinpoint causality.
Well, I think in like a 2B way,
I think
causality is just what the mind is doing is highlighting a leverage point in changing behavior. It's not the full nexus of causation. So, if I pick up a cup and pour it over, we focus on like, pour the water out or the coffee out. The thing that will change that happening again is convincing me and my planning and representational systems not to do that, not to like, boycott the person who made the mug, or
I see it as you pour something over the mic and you cause the mic to get wet.
Yeah.
And that's all there is to it. That's all there is to it. You bring in a third party, he's responsible for ruining that. Like I'm gonna think about what you're saying. Yeah. But my point is that why the extra colorful language, I guess is all I'm saying. It seems to be interesting, colorful language rather than this is what happened. Like, let me explain to you the cause and event. Like, you did this and then this is what happened. Like, and so don't do that again. Right? Why this extra layer of does it come for free? Is it just extra? Are they synonyms? I don't know. That's, I guess, that's where my
I
question
see.
is.
I see.
But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's
I think
all.
that's, yeah, no, I see what you're saying. Yeah, yeah.
Very deep into the weeds.
No, it's fun. It's fun to think
I
about.
mean, it's almost co-opting this language of ownership. Like to be responsible for an action is almost to own the action as a possession, in the same way that, if I I'm responsible for the behavior of my dog. If my dog bites you, I'm responsible. I own the dog. And so I should be held responsible if the dog bites you. Um, and it's almost like applying that ownership psychology to the behavior itself. The way I'm thinking of it and translating your ideas in my head, Dave, is just to have free will and to be responsible for my actions is just to be responsive to incentives. And if I am responsive to incentives, then it makes sense to incentivize me. It makes sense to offer rewards and punishments to change my behavior. And if I'm not responsive to incentives, if I'm just behaving compulsively or helplessly or under the influence of a drug or someone who has a gun to my head, then it makes no sense to offer rewards and punishments because they're going to have no influence on me. So what it means to be free and responsible is to be the type of agent that is sensitive to the types of rewards and punishments that others can offer. Is that basically what you're saying, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, there's actually a definition of free will that is reasons responsiveness. And the
Yeah.
idea is, I mean, the core idea is that what free will is sort of a representational entry. It's not a objective feature of the world, and it's a representational entry that's basically assessing to what extent what we're calling an intentional intervention, which is sort of appealing to motivations, goals, desires, those kinds of things, either in you or in a third party, is effective. So the degree to which an intentional intervention is effective, that is what the free will representation. I mean, I don't think in the evolved system it's like tagged as the free will system, but I think when people talk about free will, in large part, it's a result of that system and that representation of the efficacy of intentional interventions for yourself and others. And a concomitant of that, or one way to explain why reasons responsiveness is part of the theorizing and the debate about free will, is exactly what you've said, which is that if I'm doing something, I have free will about it if I have reasons for doing it, and if you can change the reasons for why I'm doing something. Like, let's say I have a certain political ideology, and the reason why I have it is for a certain reason, X. And you say, actually, if you're really interested in X, you should have this other political ideology, right? To the degree that I am right that I'm choosing political ideology because of X, you should be able to change my mind, right? And so that's the idea that, I'm free to change that. And I can even change my own, if I say I really care about X, like let's say I'm devoted to my government, and I'm free to choose to do that. And then somebody convinces me my government isn't good. If I still feel like, oh, for some reason I still can't, be disloyal to my government, I mean, I don't experience myself as free. Like there's something compelling me that isn't me, right, within me, or like, my own deliberation, motivation, reasoning systems are not under the control of this motivation system that's sort of autonomous from me, and it's just compelling me to be like loyal to my government, even though I don't want to be, meaning like these planning and motivational systems. So, yeah, reasons responsiveness, the idea behind why that is coming up in free will, and that's not our idea about reasons responsiveness, but it's that it's ultimately informing. It's because it's about this adaptation for assessing this efficacy of intentional interventions, if that makes sense.
I just want to. I'm
yeah.
going to throw.
Yeah, dead.
But at the same time, I totally agree with Deb that this psychology is often co-opted and exploited by coalitions.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the
Yeah.
spirit of entertaining all hypotheses
Yeah.
here, my particular, I mean, like, I'm having a hard time moving off the position of the more parsimonious explanation of in order to coordinate people, I need to have them enter the matrix. And the matrix is everyone gets to choose. And if we all agree everyone gets to choose, then anyone can be gone after, because I have to make sure that I get as far away from the idea of a causal physics in order to ensure that I have every right to be able to go after everyone. And free will is the mother lode of, like, it just basically says you could have chosen otherwise. And that is anything goes now. And so the idea, as soon as I can get everyone to agree that everyone can choose, that's it.
Interesting.
Then my coordination, then the coordination psychology takes off, right? Because then as soon as you're like, well, he couldn't choose. And so that's an interesting part. Like, you know, people who want to rail against gays, they don't like to hear like they couldn't choose that, just like you didn't choose heterosexuality, right? They're like, man, I don't like that argument.
Right.
Like, and so I mean, but the idea like they couldn't choose, and it's like that prevents them from coordinating,
Yeah.
right? So and I find that interesting. So anyway, so that's my only, that's where I come to free will. I know it's a very lovely, cheery side of free will, but I see it as the requirement for coordination.
Yeah, cool.
So anyway,
it's almost like it's like a God of the gaps argument, where like people try to put God into any area of scientific inquiry that we don't yet understand. Oh, God did it. And as soon as we understand it, then they find a different gap to sneak God in. It's almost like what you're saying is, if we're trying to coordinate a coalition against someone, there are all these causal stories we could tell to cancel the justification for attacking that person. And we're looking for some gap to fit the justification into. And that gap is free will, just as, you know, it's this area outside of causal determinism that's uncorruptible, and that we can use that as a coordination point for going after this person. Is that basically what you're saying?
Yeah, pretty much. Like
Okay.
in order to coordinate, it's like, let's see, disgust going to work? All right, maybe not here, although it works everywhere. Anger, maybe fear. Like you go down your list of stuff, and I think that just free will is one of those things that allows you to. It's just like, you know, he could choose. it's like the ultimate. It's the ultimate kind of you know, lightning rod. You know,
It's the conversation stopper. It's the God did it. You know, yeah.
No, I think it's interesting. Well, I really look forward. We haven't had a lot of that kind of conversation. That's a topic that just has not been in any journal for a while. It's going to be exciting to see what happens. And so, and hopefully some philosophers will chime in too. Too bad Dennett's not around.
Yeah, Christian List has some great work, and we actually talked to him. We went back and forth a lot, and he's a big fan of this work. So I look forward to it, and I'm looking forward to. I know, you know, David is one of the other people doing this. Is sort of the evolutionary psychology of philosophy of mind. Like I really think that the fact that all of philosophy, in most, like a lot of philosophy, is predicated on ideas prior to the notion of how information gets into phenotypes over multiple generations. So a lot of it was sort of stuck with like, what does a blank slate, what can a blank slate know by the time it dies, right? Like just with an individual lifespan. And so if you read like even Hume, for example, a lot of the ideas of Hume, if you actually read association, not as a within lifespan time, but sort of this idea of over multiple generations, it's actually like of psych, right? So in other words, like there's a lot of prior to Darwin, without understanding how historical time can show up in organisms, there's a lot of ideas that once you just add that, oh no, differential reproductive success is how structure gets into the individual phenotype. I think a lot of philosophical issues sort of change, and I think there's this enormous thing still to be done of sort of integrating evolutionary psychology with philosophy of mind, not just for like feckless bookkeeping reasons either, but like there's tons of studies that are predicated on, like, for example, there's all these Lebesgue studies on free will. And one of the things we point out in our paper is like, these might all just be for nothing, for example. So it's like, you know, more money than you or I or all three of us have ever gotten in grants have been spent on the neurocognitive activity prior to a decision for this Lebesgue study, and it might not be for any good reason, right? So these have important theoretical implications, or like empirical implications too. So I look forward to that as a new area.
absolutely.
Can I ask, I know that we're probably going to need to wrap up soon, but
Yeah,
I just
sure.
want to ask the two of you, like
Mhm.
where you see the field of EvPsych going. Like, what are you most
Mm,
excited about in addition to the things you just talked about?
I
Dave.
would echo. I would
David.
Oh,
echo
David.
Dave's. Well, here I'll start.
Yeah.
I would echo Dave's excitement about using evolutionary psychology to shed light on philosophy and philosophy of mind. I see a large part of the discipline of philosophy as making arguments that appeal to intuitions, uh, while the philosophers are in the dark about the origins of those intuitions. And I think the best way to do philosophy is to figure out where those intuitions come from, and only then can we say whether we should, trust these intuitions, but not these ones, right? We need to actually do some good evolutionary psychology to figure out where these intuitions are coming from. There's an interesting, so I'm bringing this into the study of consciousness, for example. The philosopher David Chalmers talks about the hard problem of consciousness, which is how does consciousness arise from mere brain activity? And he also talks about the meta problem of consciousness, which is why does it seem like there's a hard problem? Why do we have these intuitions that brain activity and consciousness are fundamentally different things?
Yeah.
And so I think the way to solve the hard problem is to first solve the meta problem. And I think that is true of all, if not, most or all of philosophical problems. That we need to first translate them into meta problems and solve them, and then we can begin to solve the actual problem. So I'm excited about Dave's work, the evolutionary psychology of psychology, the evolutionary psychology of philosophy, and our philosophical intuitions. I would love to see the field do more mathematical modeling and more game theory. I know we had Dan Conroy Bean on, and he was he's an evangelist for more math modeling in the field, and I think he's right, and we need to do more of that. What else am I excited about? Um, those are the two big ones. I want evolutionary psychology to take over. In addition to philosophy, I want it to take over political science. There are too few evolutionary minded people in political science. I'm trying to change that. I tried to change that with my paper on the alliance theory of political belief systems, but I think there's much more work to be done there.
Do you go to any
Um,
PSI conferences? Like, is that something that you're?
I was invited to a couple of them. I ultimately decided not to go, but maybe I'll try to go there and spread the good word of what would John do. But uh, yeah, I'm excited about that. I think economics. I think we should bring more evolutionary psychology into
Yeah.
economics, consumer behavior, rationality. I mean, the sky's the limit. Anything that stems from a human is ultimately within the purview of evolutionary psychology. Humans
Yeah.
are animals, they're products of the Darwinian process. Anything that comes out of a human has to be subject to evolutionary psychological reasoning. I mean, people talk about it as reductionism or reductionism gone too far. I don't view it as reduction at all. We're already animals. Like that, there's no reducing.
Yeah.
Like the human mind already is an evolved organ that's been shaped by natural selection. There's no reducing to do, right? It's all there on the surface. We just gotta, take the right lens to view it.
I think
So
that if we change
yeah.
if we change their vocabulary from reduction, if
Mm.
anyone says that to you, I say that sounds like you're denying it. I think that's how you kind of get them off that, right? So it's
Yeah.
like, are you denying that there's a? Because I think that's all that I need to ask, and then
Yeah.
like, well, no, like, well, me neither. So we're on the same page. It matters. So no, I think the political science. Casey Klofstad is here at and he's one of the very few political scientists I think that has, and well, in addition to Michael Bang Peterson, Sir Michael.
Yeah, he's knighted. We've never
Mhm.
had a knight on, unless you're knighted, Deb.
Can women be knighted? Is that a strange question?
That's a very good question. And if not, that's a problem.
What could we be if not knighted?
Somebody's gonna have to Google that.
Chat
True.
is. Don't think I'm not going to ask as soon
The
as we get
GK
off.
folks are face palming. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yes. We have
Um,
no titles. Yeah.
those are great. Those are all great directions. And so, in the
like I said, I'm stepping down from EHB in, I think I have like another year and a half or something like that. I think it's technically 2 years, but in a year and a half, I think I'm going to have to bring someone else on to at least help train them up. Although it's like I said, it's not that hard. It's just time, a lot of time. And so, but if you, in the meantime, in the next 18 months, you want to put something together on this philosophy, political science, economics, even a hodgepodge of ideas, or evolutionary psychology into the future, like, please take me up on that offer. I'm concerned that the next, whoever takes it over after is not going to take the time to do some of these special features. And so I really want to kind of take full advantage while I'm doing it. So if you have any ideas, I really am all ears. But again, even bringing people in who might not get it right, bringing them in for the conversation and have it be a conversation, or picking one person in the field of philosophy or economics or political science. Let's write a paper and let's go back and forth, have some commentary, just to kind of see whether or not there's anything that we can take from it, and anything that can be used, for programs of research or future work or whatever. So think about it. And also pass it along to other people that that you find are saying some interesting stuff, who might not be exactly evolutionary, but are interested in learning.
Awesome. Keep the conversation going. We have one question we usually ask towards the end. Sometimes it's a stumper, which is there anything we should have asked you?
I think we went from like one end.
I mean, we covered a wide range.
We
got
really
into
did.
free will.
Yes, there is something you should have asked me. You didn't ask me about tears.
Ooh.
Deb, tell us about tears.
No. I'm just kidding.
Oh, you're gonna make me cry
for next time. We'll have to have you
on. Have you had Daniel on here?
We plan to.
Yeah.
But no, Dan Sneezer is great. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you this is why being at EHB was so fun, is because Asmir Gorsanin, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, so I apologize for messing that up, but he's done a lot of work on tears, and he was talking about how emotions, adding tears to emotions makes them a little bit easier to recognize and so forth. But I was reading through his paper, and it dawned on me, like, this is WTR. Like, it was just like, it struck me over the head, and I'm like, but I have no time to do it. So I like, Daniel, like, you want to start a project? Because he's so good at thinking about stuff and putting stuff together and writing stuff up. And so, but basically the idea is that, what are tears? We kind of never really had an evolutionary idea of what tears were, but it's like it's the opposite of the scream and the yell, which can be used for good and bad, but tears can be to kind of signal positive and negative sorts of things. But the question is, tears do seem to be a signal of either value or benefit kind of thing, depending on the particular context. So it's just an amplitude. It's the amplifier for the low leveraged. Isn't that awful? But I think that's true.
Interesting. It's a really nice example of taking a really an obvious thing and not accepting we don't know about it, and trying to push on what's up with tears.
Yeah.
So the idea is that everything ranges from negative to positive value for me psychologically. And what tears are is signaling the tails of that distribution, the two extremes, either extreme positive value or extreme negative value. Is that the idea?
Yes, but it's communicating. You're imposing a lot of costs on me, and I don't have the physical leverage, as or the formidability, the attractiveness, or the status, or whatever, in order to kind of convince you to stop. And so it's basically a signal of, don't hurt me more. It's intense. Like like, otherwise, if I'm big and I can bop you over the head, I'm not going to use tears. I'm going to scream. I'm going to use my formidability, and I'm going to deny you benefits and all that. So impose costs. So I would say that the lower leverage person who is kind of caught in a situation, that tears communicate the imposition of costs. And I also think that on the positive side of things, the intense happy and gratitude sorts of things also tend to be done by I'll have to think about the similar kind of the similar explanation in terms of the lower leveraged, but it does seem to be that, it does seem to be that people of lower leverage, by which I will define as smaller like circumference, or something
kids
like
have small
like,
arms. Kids, you know,
they're
kids
going
are
to
a good
be more
example.
likely to weep at the positive, right?
Mhm.
And so, and
Mm.
I would say, so if you've ever seen a very like strong man like begin to cry, like or like tear up, it means it's really on the tail ends of either good or bad, and it's substantial. Like it's something, things are extremely bad, like, or extremely good. But my point is that, but the idea that, weepiness is a kind of thing is typically left for the lower leverage. So you really have to be out leveraged and in order to make a very large, formidable beast.
So it's the interaction of extreme value and low leverage.
I think so. I think that's exactly
Interesting.
So if you're writing fiction,
I can't help but
sorry, David, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No,
No,
I
go
was just
ahead.
going to say, like, if you're writing fiction, a king crying would be interesting, but a little kid crying would not be.
And it's social emotions, right? So it's not like your hamburger really disgusts you and you're going to cry, right? So it's even disgust, you can partition out when to expect it. So social disgust, versus a pathogen disgust that is, like a hamburger. Like you're not going to, even though it could be intense, like that would be like satire, like seeing someone cry at their hamburger, right? And so it could be
parenting,
that your parent didn't value you enough to make you the hot dog. Like that could be why you're crying about the hamburger, but it's not right. So
it's interesting. Yeah, no, it's definitely communicative. Yeah.
I can't help but ask this question. I know we have to wrap up, but I have
We're having fun.
An inkling of suspicion here of the story. So you're crying. So let's say I'm hurting you in some way. Maybe I'm bad mouthing how horrible evolution and human behavior is, and how much of a terrible job you've done with it over the years. And you're weeping, right?
Probably not, but go ahead.
Maybe no, you probably wouldn't. You're one of the ballsiest people I know.
Good try.
You're more formidable than me. I'd probably be the one weeping. So you're weeping, and the tears make me stop and apologize, right? Why? Why should that work? Like what what reason do I have as the signal recipient to respond to that signal?
To the extent that you value my welfare at all. So you won't care if you don't value my welfare at all, right? So I actually, so I like to go very far out on the ledges, and this is not where I want to end it. So I'll bring it back to probably something positive. But you think about I was watching Black Mirror. So you think about these crazy people who are like doing such awful things, but like the BTK, like the crazy killers who like get these girls and then like they do awful things and they kill them. Like these girls are crying. Like they're probably like, everything's fine. I don't care. Right. So the tears aren't doing anything. So like if I don't have any empathy or idea of your welfare or any, I don't care about your, to me, it's funny. It's like strange. That's a strange kind of reaction to be having. Like, you think I care. Like, and so that's
gross. Yeah.
I know.
No, but I'm saying like that's an example of morality, disgust right there. I just felt the gross, the use of morality, using disgust in morality. But no, it's right. Yeah.
I see. So it's so it's a signal of the magnitude of the harm I'm inflicting you that I might not have been aware of, and it's really only going to work on me insofar as I do value your welfare, and if I don't, the tears aren't going to work.
That's right.
Okay, interesting. Cool.
So, I mean, and that would be like if you ever saw your enemy crying, it's like, it's not, it's like, not that I've ever done that.
Yeah, here, let me lick them. Ooh, taste those sweet tears.
So like the mugs of the tears of evolutionary psychology.
We should sell those for speaking of monetizing.
We'd make a lot of money. Yeah, I mean, you talked at the beginning of the episode about you fantasized about having the ski chalet and the Porsche. Maybe this is your ticket.
Good throwback.
Maybe I'm writing a textbook. Isn't that the way you do it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I hope so. That would be great. It would be great if you can reflect on your life and you got the Porsche and the ski chalet and the sweet evolutionary psychology gig together. That would be That'd be
Well, actually,
something.
I'm starting up a separate business that will hopefully bring in the money and all the funding for our research. So that's
Okay,
Oh, nice.
cool. No
so
regrets.
I'll tell you at HBS. That's
Okay,
not
good. That's wonderful. Yeah, we'll see. We'll
Awesome.
get into this. One thing John Tooby always said was that as important as any of his theory papers, as good as they were, as long as they were good, as important as those were, the most important thing he produced was students. And Deb, you are one of those students, and we that's like a way of saying thank you for existing. Your work has been incredibly important, and the field would not be what it is if you did not exist. So thank you for everything you've done and all your service to the field.
Thank you. Well, listen, I couldn't be more grateful. I mean, how lucky are we that we get to do this?
Yeah.
So quite a life. So thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure. We should do this every week.
This was so fun. Yeah.
Yeah, we're trying to.
We'll have you
so
back, I'm sure,
We'll
yeah.
definitely have you back. David, we finished up another episode, and we haven't had enough reviews, so we're encouraging people to submit content. Even
Yes.
mention, like what you would like to have on the.
Yeah. If you have any ideas for topics, for bits, for people to bring on, anything you'd like us to do in an episode, if you want me to sing I Will Always Love You, I'm happy to do that. Just, give us some feedback.
I didn't know you. Oh yeah, you sing. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm actually a really great singer.
Is that a joke or is it for real? No, but you do sing. You are a singer, aren't you? Like you did the music for this.
That's true, but that was not singing. That was synthetic instruments.
But don't you, when you were in another band, were you the singer in the band?
I was not the singer. I actually don't have a very good voice. I can maybe muster a tune, but it's not very good at it.
If we get when we reach $1,000 a month, David will sing on
Yeah,
Patreon.
totally. That's a great incentive for you.
And
If we make 1,000,
if we get
I'll sing whatever you want.
10,000, I will sing, and you really don't want that to happen.
I think we may have just disincentivized our listeners.
Wait, I'm confused about how this works. So you want a good thing to happen? And I'm confusing the carrot for the stick. Okay.
Yeah, that's
no, that's the thing. If you don't give on Patreon, I'll start singing. That's the
there you go. Okay, now we got the incentives right.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Now I understand how coordination works. Okay, good.
Yep.
Got it. Well, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week. Bye, David.
Bye.